Okay, terrific. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for showing up. Um, I'm Penny Jez, and I'm president of VACRA, and I took over in January of this year. And I want to welcome our members and people who are signing in from across the country, and some repeat people as well. So please welcome. Our program today is going to be introduced by Joan Lewis. Joan is one of our founding members from Falls Church, Goodwin House, Bailey's Crossroads, and she will be introducing our guest speaker today. Joan, go ahead.
Thank you, Penny. Linda Latiana is the hallmark for resident-friendly management and has been a long-time supporter of VACRA. As Chief Operating Officer of Goodwin House, Linda is responsible for keeping our 2 life plan communities strong and consistent in reputation, service, and practice. In addition, she develops and oversees new initiatives and programs to serve residents and the broader community. Linda also provides oversight to our clinical pastoral education program, which trains religious leaders of many faiths in ministering to seniors. While serving as executive director of Goodwin House Bailey's Crossroads, she led us through a $140 million expansion and renovation. Starting her career as a licensed clinical social worker, she has served on state, national, and nonprofit boards and commissions. She is committed to the field of senior living and to the education of those who work and will work in it. Linda's door is always open, and she advocates listening to residents as well as staff and giving them a voice. Linda.
Thank you, Joan, for that lovely introduction. This is going to be a little tricky right now. I'm going to move my iPad into another area so IT can get on my computer, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we're going to see if this will work. Hold on one second. Okay. It's the sound and the picture. And see,
recording in progress.
Got it. Okay, neither of those will work. So if you can get me on. All right, I'm going into another room so I can start the presentation. Can you still hear me? Oops. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So hopefully he'll get my computer working. I'd like to tell you a little about Goodwin House before we get started. Goodwin House has over 54 years of service to older adults. We began in 1967 with one CCRC called Goodwin House Alexandria. And in 1987, we opened a second community, Goodwin House Bailey's Crossroads. In 1998, we added a Medicare certified hospice and a licensed home care agency, one of the first CCRCs that started home and community-based services. We now offer Goodwin House at Home, a life care at home program that is expanding into DC, and a Medicare certified home health and rehab agency, and soon a third senior living community in Loudoun County. While Goodwin House is affiliated with the Episcopal Church, we welcome residents and members of all faiths and worldviews and seek to be a place of belonging for all persons. The vision of Goodwin House Incorporated is expanding the places and ways we serve older adults. We are guided by our mission to support, honor, and uplift the lives of older adults and the people who serve them. When I came to Goodwin House over 30 years ago, most board members were men, and all were required to be Episcopalians in good standing in the Diocese of Virginia. At that time, board members were not selected by the competencies that were needed for the board or what attributes they would bring. They were members of the local Episcopal churches, friends, and colleagues. And change happens over time. I thought it would be helpful to explain to you how the board membership has evolved at Goodwin House over the years. The requirement to only accept Episcopalians in the Diocese of Virginia to the Goodwin House Board was first loosened to allow Episcopalians in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Excuse me. Can you just adjust your picture because we're not seeing your face?
Yeah, well, I'm standing in the hallway.
Okay,
I'll be, hopefully soon I will be on my computer.
okay.
Okay, so the next step was to allow Episcopalians in the Diocese of Washington to be on board committees, but not to be a member of the board yet. Then it was loosened so that there were no specific requirements for church affiliation other than to have some Episcopalians on the board. But all of this served to greatly open the opportunities for more diversity among board members and was the first step in allowing residents to be members of the board. So residents on the board. Over the years, the chairs of the resident council of each of our life plan communities were invited to attend Goodwin House board meetings. They also provided a written report to the board and had a voice at the meetings, but no vote. Their role was to represent the residents of our life plan communities. Resident council members also attended board committees, which is actually where all the work takes place. The chair of the resident finance committee attended the board finance committee and received all financial information that the board members received. The chair of the resident outreach committee, I'm having to, attended and had a vote actually at the board community accountability and outreach committee. Resident involvement was welcomed, encouraged, and residents' opinions were sought. The bylaws of Goodwin House Incorporated never stated that residents could not be on the board of trustees. It also never stated that they could. It didn't distinguish qualified residents from other qualified board nominees. The following language is in the current bylaws for Goodwin House. The board shall at all times include trustees who are members of the Episcopal Church, provided, however, that there shall otherwise be no minimum compositional requirement in view of the corporation's overriding need to attract the talent necessary for the accomplishment of its mission, irrespective of religious affiliation. This clearly places board composition on the needs of the board to allow them to select members that can bring to the board what they can bring to the board and not necessarily for who they are. This philosophy is consistent with that of Leading Age Virginia. According to Melissa Andrews, boards should have the flexibility to appoint the most qualified people possible to set strategy and sustain mission. If a person who fits the bill through skills, expertise, or perspective is a resident, the board should recruit them. But boards shouldn't be required to put anyone on their board that doesn't add value, again, through perspective, skills, or expertise. If you happen to live in a community that has residents on the board, those residents are no different than any other board member, which is sustaining the mission and planning for the future, and they are vetted accordingly. Those residents are not representing the resident body nor their own investment as a resident. Management manages and boards govern. Just because there is a board member who happens to be a resident, those directives do not change. Having a resident on the governing board doesn't equal control or necessarily more transparency. For Goodwin House, all residents that are interested receive all financial information except specific staff salaries and have quarterly open meetings with the CFO. And this occurred even before residents were voting members of the board. Residents that are familiar with condo boards often equate long life plan community governing boards as the same, but they are quite different. Most life plan communities are not ownership condo models, and condo boards are more likely concerned with the present and not future vision or long-term commitment to their residents and future residents. Life plan communities, or CCRCs, are governed by the Bureau of Insurance State Corporation Commission, which has a resident Bill of Rights that states the board of directors or its designated representatives is required to hold meetings with residents at least quarterly. Residents must receive 7 days notice of each meeting, and residents have the right to participate in free discussion of issues relating to the facility. Issues may include income, expenditures, and financial matters as they apply to the facility and proposed changes in policies, programs, facilities, and services. So where to begin if your management is not open to residents on the board or is not keeping residents informed? Every life plan community is required to have a disclosure statement that is updated annually and is available to all residents and prospective residents. This is a public document. It can be obtained by going to the State Corporation Commission website. So please read it. Be proactive. Have your resident council schedule quarterly meetings with management. As I just mentioned, it's required by the State Corporation Commission Bill of Rights. At Goodwin House, twice a year, the resident council hosts a semi-annual meeting and invites the community's executive director, as well as the chair of the board and the president CEO, each presenting from their own perspective. These meetings are open to all residents and are well attended. Residents also have the opportunity to ask questions. If you don't have a relationship with management, start slowly and develop one. A nice way to get to know each other is through small monthly lunches. At Goodwin House Bailey's Crossroads, the resident council hosts 3 lunches per month, one with the executive director, one with the CEO, and one with the COO. These lunches usually involve a representative of the resident council and 6 to 8 residents. In the past, the resident council also hosted a quarterly lunch with board members to get them to know them as well. And I can tell you the board members really appreciated meeting directly with residents and hearing their views. Use your committee structure to invite department directors to present each month on the status of their department, to include budgetary compliance, capital projects, staffing, and other issues of interest. Learn what your board is seeking in terms of the competencies for new board members. What is the expertise needed at this time? For example, if your organization is repositioning your community, you might need developers, bankers, or architects. If your organization is moving to home and community-based services, you might need experts in Medicare or home health or hospice. Determine the points of resistance and then evaluate how you can meet each other partway through non-confrontational information sessions. And how can you reach common goals? We hear about the changes that will need to take place when the boomers move into our communities. Well, the boomers are here. They're interested, they're inquisitive, and getting involved. Our communities and our boards need to welcome this new energy and find ways to partner for the benefit of all residents. And with that, I'll turn this back over to our moderator and see if there are any questions. And I'm still in the hallway, so I apologize. Maybe I can move toward my office and see if my computer's back on track. Any questions?
This is Mary Corley in Mechanicsville. And my question is, can you give examples of how the resident members have influenced the decision or raised a topic that they wanted addressed that was pretty major?
Are you talking about the residents that are on the board or other residents?
Yes, on the board, the ones on the board.
Yeah, the residents, it's interesting because the residents that are on the board are not representing the resident population. They're a member of the board just as any other member of the board, and they're vetted as such. So they don't bring up resident issues unless asked specifically to do so. The resident issues come through the resident council chairs or the intimate lunches that we have with residents.
I'm actually interested in any topic, any issues that they brought up that not necessarily that the residents have raised, but maybe something that they see as important, such as climate change issues, a specific aspect of climate change, or some other thing like that they thought was important for the board to consider in their strategic plans.
Our board has a defined strategic plan, and the residents that are on the board address the strategic plan. One of the issues that came up recently, one of our pillars is dementia. And there was a discussion about changing dementia to brain health because it's more inclusive, and residents weighed in on that. Residents are mostly concerned about rate increases. They're concerned about growth, and part of our, as I mentioned, our vision is to increase the ways and places we serve older adults. So that is a big discussion on the board, especially as we're growing as an organization and moving not only from Virginia, but into Washington, D.C. now, and that's new for our organization. Can I move in? Okay, I'm going to move into my office. So let's see if I can do this.
Mary, are you finished with your question?
For the moment, yes.
For the moment, okay.
Okay,
Jim Haynes
I'm
also
back.
has his hand up.
can you hear me? You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
There you are.
All right, go ahead. Now I'm back.
You know, your neck is cut off.
Yeah,
so-
if you tip your screen down a little bit, or
I have a camera on my monitor. Better?
That
Better.
looks good.
A little bit better.
Okay,
Okay, now I'm back. Sorry. Go ahead.
the request came through chat, wondering if you would be able to provide your comments in written form so that we can share them with people who
I would
either
be
weren't
happy-
able-
I would be
It was
happy
just
to.
correct.
Should I send them to you,
Yes.
Claudia?
Yes.
And then you can distribute them?
And
I'd
then
be
I'll
happy to.
distribute them. Thank you.
okay. Good. Jim Haynes has his hand up. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. That was, in a word, fantastic. Linda, well done. And I think I was
Thank
one of
you.
those that asked for your copy of your comments. I want to read them and digest them.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No, great job. Great job. I just returned late yesterday afternoon from Leading Age's annual meeting in Atlanta. I'd be happy to comment on that if you want, Penny, anytime or not at all.
If there's anything that relates to the topic today, yes.
Now or at the end of the meeting?
At the end.
At the end, okay.
Yeah, I'd rather do that because I'm sorry, but I can't find my agenda, so I'll wait till the end.
All right.
Thank you.
And Joan Lewis has her hand up. Unmute yourself, Joan.
Yes, thank you. Linda, you might talk about the diversity issue that residents
Yeah.
in the community and on the board ask you to stress or expand for the strategic plan.
We have, thank you, Joan. Goodwin House has a DEI committee, and actually the residents were really interested in increasing the diversity in our communities. We started with Sage Care training for all staff. 100% of our staff are Sage Care trained, but we also started a year ago a DEI committee that sends out a newsletter every other Friday, I believe, and is working on a lot of initiatives. We have a resident group that is really drilling down on some very serious issues, and we have resident focus groups that have provided management with their, I guess, priorities on how we need to provide more of a welcome to a more diverse group. So we are heavily into that. Okay. We're heavily into that right now. We're looking at everything from the food we serve to the art on our walls to how we reach out to other groups in our immediate area. And I see we have a question.
Yes, a question in chat. Can you provide some examples for what resident participation on the board, where resident participation on the board made a difference for residents?
I think having residents on the board committees has really been the best way to get the resident voice to where it matters. And where it matters is really the finance committee. And I think that's, if you have finance committees in your communities, and you don't have a resident attending, I would really recommend that's a place to start. At the board meetings, the residents are able to put forward, the resident council chairs put forward a report. And what I tell them is to put in your report what you want the board to know, because that's the way to get the information across. Resident board members, on the other hand, provide a perspective to the board in terms of our strategic plan, but it's coming from their own experiences, their professional careers, and I wouldn't even say not necessarily age, because we have older board members as well. So that's where the board, the resident board members provide. It's really from their own experiences. It's not necessarily a resident representative.
Naomi has her hand up. Naomi? Unmute yourself. Naomi, unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Hi.
Hi.
I live in Covenant Woods, and I wondered, you mentioned SAGE training, and I don't know what that is. Could you explain that?
Sure, it's LBGTQ training. We started with management, just the leadership of our organization at both of our life plan communities, and then we've kind of drilled down to all employees, and we're going to open it to residents as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question through chat comes with, do resident board members recuse themselves from voting on the annual budget as a conflict of interest?
They do not. They're board members. They're not representing the residents.
And another is, do residents have access to the minutes of board meetings and strategic plans?
The strategic, I'll start with the strategic plan first. It's been, this current strategic plan was initiated 3 years ago, and we have regular updates of the strategic plan to residents. So it's very open. Of course, residents know all about the strategic plan and they keep up with it as frequently as they would like. We'd like to present it more, but I don't think there's that much more interest, but it is presented on a regular basis. As far as minutes of board meetings, I don't know, some of our residents, do you get the board minutes? There's no, I actually am not sure if residents see the board minutes. The residents that are on the board certainly do. Claudia, when you were chair, did you ever see the board minutes? Or Joan?
No, I did not. I was vice chair, but
I
I personally think it would be nice if the resident council chair gave a report at a community meeting occasionally on what was going on in the board, but that's a different matter. It's not the topic at hand.
Okay, and
Like,
Jen
don't be
saw them as
related.
well. Okay.
If I heard something in a board meeting that I thought it was important for the resident council to know, or the residents to know, then I would ask the chair of the chair of the board or the CEO if I could release that information. And it was usually positive.
Goodman House is a very transparent organization, so there's not much we don't share with residents. So, yeah. Let me see what else. How long after board meeting are minutes available to residents? Okay. They're not available in full to residents. In my experience, residents receive summary of key board decisions. Absolutely. But remember, we also have resident council chairs at the board meetings, and they can relay information to residents. They're there representing the residents. So we have resident council chairs as well as resident board meetings, board members. And we don't have a number. Our foundation board also has residents on it, and there's not a set number there either. And it's not like one board member for each community. It's really, they're vetted just like any other board nominees.
Claudia, Naomi? Unmute. Naomi,
Yeah,
unmute.
Okay. I guess, for example, we recently went through a change for our communication platform going digital. And that was a huge expense. And of course, we, the residents, were not aware of that expense or anything like that. Is that the kind of things that when you share more to the residents, that you would share that in a meeting or something like that?
Residents see the budget, they see the monthly financials, they see the capital budget, they get reports on the capital budget every month from the executive director. So there are no surprises. The residents know exactly what we're going to be doing and spending our money on for the upcoming year. And they also get input into the capital budgets.
And how many, okay, you said there's not a limit or like a set number. Currently, for your board of directors, how many outside people and then resident people?
I think we have 12 board members and 1 or 2 residents. I'm trying to think how many residents we have at the moment. Do we know one? It's Tony? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay, and you also said that the committees
Committee
can
structure.
also listen to the board committees, I guess, that are appropriate.
Residents attend, the chair of the resident finance committee attends and is an active member of the board finance committee and gets all the financial information that is distributed to the board finance members. So that's if I had any recommendation, I would recommend that you can get resident council members to attend board committee meetings, because that's where all the work takes place. And that's where you can get a real voice. Our resident counts, our board minutes, our board meetings consist of a lot of written material that's given to the board prior to the meeting. And then there's a consent agenda. So the written information isn't discussed now. The board discusses the strategic priorities. So that's where the discussion is at the board meeting. So if you want information to go to board members, it's in the written report. But as far as board committees, absolutely residents, and they're not board member residents. They're just residents that are on chairing committees of the resident council.
Very fascinating. Thank you.
That ties in, I think, with a question from chat that says, what advice would you give to residents to increase transparency in a CCRC?
Well, I talked about the disclosure statement, and that, please read that if you haven't. It's updated every year. It has the resident contracts in it. It has all the financial information. It's all out there. So as far as transparency, every organization is different, and Goodwin House has always been very transparent. Always since Goodwin House Bailey's Crossroads opened, and the residents kind of demanded it. But management has been, over the last 25 years, very receptive to sharing everything. You all are the stakeholders, right? You need the information. So I can't imagine living somewhere where you don't have that information. So transparency, I would start with developing a relationship with your executive director if you don't have one. And that's, we talked about ways to do that. It's baby steps. It doesn't happen overnight. Being confrontational doesn't help. But there's information that you are required to have as a CCRC that's out there for you. So what other, I guess I'm curious, what kind of, when you say transparency, what kind of information are you seeking? Anyone?
Yep. I, for one, would like to see this strategic plan. And I would like for residents to have greater input into the formation of that.
Mhm. Okay. It makes sense. That tells you where you're going, where your future is.
Mhm.
I think, and if I can just clip in
Jump
on
in.
the strategic plan, the when our newest strategic plan was presented 3 years ago, it was as part of a town hall. So it had maybe 20 minutes, and residents felt not enough time to delve into what that meant. So worked through the resident council and appointed a liaison to the strategic plan, whose job was not to be part of the strategic plan's workings, but to organize twice yearly hour-long meetings where the only topic was the strategic plan, and that materials, the topics were to be because there are 9, I think, areas of focus for our strategic plan, which ones were going to be of the focus of that particular hour. Materials for that were to be presented and available in our library ahead of time. The topics were to be announced, and then we would go to the meeting prepared to ask better questions. So that kind of thing can be done, and that was done through the resident council relationship with management.
And our strategic plan is pretty unique. It's the first plan that I've seen like this. We have advanced teams for every pillar on the strategic plan, and these teams are made up of lots of different people that work together on that plan, and they meet regularly. So it's a living, breathing strategic plan. It's not one that was developed and put on a shelf. It changes monthly, and not the plan, but the work on the plan. So getting twice a year updates, I think, is really important for the residents, and not both of our communities don't want that. We provide as much information to our residents as they want, but we don't force it. So there are 2 things. I think one is what's really important is to work through your resident council. That's your legitimate body that represents residents and represents residents to management. A strong resident council is really, really important.
Yeah. Linda, I also have a question about the resident satisfaction survey that's routinely used across at least Virginia. And I'm always concerned that these questions are limited in terms of how they're framed. And then the report the community provides on what residents have said about their levels of satisfaction with the CCRC is often thin as well. And I'm familiar, I have a degree in social sciences. I know how to frame research questions. And I'm really concerned that these just don't go far enough, nor does the report back to the community go far enough. What does your place do with regard to that survey?
Okay, that's a really good question. Historically, we've used Holleran for resident satisfaction and then engagement surveys. Just before the pandemic, we started one of the things we decided with the strategic plan was to do more frequent pulse surveys on specific issues. So if there was an issue in dining, we would do a dining issue. I sent a pulse survey out at the end of 2020 to all the new residents that had moved in during the pandemic to see how they were doing, because I was really concerned that they weren't experiencing life as we know it in a life plan community. We're getting ready to do another pulse survey, and these are in-house surveys, and they're short surveys, and we're going to do it on SurveyMonkey. Before we send it out, we will vet that with a couple of residents, so we make sure that the information that we're asking is also of value to residents, and that it makes sense. So we still use some of the Holleran high satisfiers as questions, but we do adjust it to what's going on in the community at the time.
I like the interchange of that very much. We're used to having documents and communication top down with not an invitation to respond back. And I think that's something many CCRCs could, institute in their places.
I agree. I think that's really important. We rarely send anything out without a resident vetting it, especially during the pandemic. But I know the executive director meets with the chair and vice chair of the resident council on a regular basis. And if anything is going out, he has them take a look at it before it goes out. Make sure that we're saying what we mean to say and that it's being understood the way we mean it to be.
That's important. I've got two questions, Naomi and then Jim Trent from Lakewood. Naomi, go ahead. You're muted, Naomi.
Okay, I'll try again. Hi. Would the board consider a revamping of the strategy around nursing facilities and nursing home facilities, and or in light of what is new called the greenhouse project?
Yeah.
Okay, well, interesting you should mention that. We, Goodman House, many years ago, started person-directed care. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we brought in a consultant to start our own person-directed movement, because we were planning in one of our life plan communities a new high-rise small house. And that's the greenhouse model, but it's a high-rise. It's a lovely state-of-the-art, I think, only high-rise small house model in the area. And it is, so the board, yes, absolutely was involved in that. All of the staff were involved for probably 2 years before that was even built. It's a very different model, using care partners to cook in each small house. And each house has a living room, dining room, huge kitchen, and 10 residents living there. The care partners actually cook in the kitchen. Food isn't brought up from a main kitchen to the small house. They cook, they clean, they do programming. We also add, life enrichment for additional programming, social workers, that sort of thing. But it's the next evolution of the greenhouse model. And yes, the board did get involved in that. It's a very expensive model to operate. So of course, management was very involved in those decisions. It's a lovely community.
Yeah. Naomi, you're still muted. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Question. And Jim?
Sorry. Unmute. Okay. So you said that took approximately 2 to 3 years to get to the point of the finances and all that approval and working that through. Is that correct?
Yes, the small houses have been open, I think, 4 years now.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Jim Trent, Lakewood. Jim, unmute yourself. Unmute. Jim, unmute. Claudia, can you unmute him from your screen?
All I can do is ask him to unmute.
Okay. Jim, can you try unmuting?
Maybe you could put something in the chat room.
You could.
Well, there's a question. Where is your small house? The small house is on the campus of Goodwin House, Alexandria. It's their new healthcare center.
There was another question in chat asking if the board meetings were online.
What do you mean online?
Well,
Are they in person or Zoom?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
what we find.
during the pandemic, they've been on Zoom. We haven't been together yet. I'm looking forward to be.
But I don't think if the implication of the question was
They are not recorded.
they're not recorded and or shared anyway, and it's not a public, I mean, we're not all
Correct.
invited to come attend the
We are not.
board meetings.
Could I just ask, why not?
Hmm.
Board meetings are private information. I don't think we want it to be public for many reasons. And it's not keeping things away from residents. It's not a public forum. And it shouldn't be. That's where the organization discusses private business.
Claudia's put up a sign. Unmute, Jim. I still can't.
Penny, can I ask a question, please?
Sure, please. I'm here.
Linda, would you be willing to share some of your findings when you did your survey of residents, new residents that, that were brought in during the pandemic?
Sure, I haven't looked at it in quite a while. One of the things I was concerned about, as you all know, when you move into a life plan community, the experience is meeting people over meals, in programs, getting to know your neighbors. And that was something that certainly shut down during the pandemic. So my concern, and one of the questions was, are you meeting your neighbors? How are you getting along? Are you getting what you need from Goodwin House? Are your questions answered? And what I found was that even though we were kind of confined to apartments and the dining venues were not open, people on the floors, their neighbors reached out to them and made sure that the new residents were welcomed, just in a different way. So I don't think there was a single person. There were only about 24 people that came in during that period of time. And there weren't any that were upset, dissatisfied. They were appreciative of the measures we took to keep everyone safe. And I was pleasantly surprised that they weren't concerned. I was more concerned, I think, than they were, but there was a lot more going on the residential floors than I was aware of too. So that was probably part of it.
Thank
They
you.
were getting together.
Has Jim been able to unmute yet?
See if you put something else in.
Put your sign up again, Claudia.
It's me, Naomi.
Okay, I mean, Naomi, I'm sorry. Unmute, Jim.
Oh,
Yeah, I sent him the message through the
it's in a
system.
message.
Claudia, can you unmute everybody temporarily?
No,
Okay,
all I
I
can
think he
do,
should,
all I can do
Jim,
is ask.
There he goes.
Oh, he's on.
Good, yay.
Go ahead, Jim.
Whom are you referring to?
That
I
one.
can't, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I guess I was a few minutes late joining the meeting and I apologize for that, but if you haven't already covered this, could you tell me how the resident members of the board are selected? Are they selected by the other residents, appointed by the board, or what?
Okay. Every fall, the board seeks nominations for new board members, and the residents on the board are nominated just as any other residents are. They're not nominated because they're residents. They're nominated because of what they can bring to the board, and they're vetted just like any other nominee. So they're not separated out as resident board members. They're just board members. And when my early conversation was that Goodwin House also has the resident council chair, each community, as a member and a voice at the board meetings. So that's
that
in addition to.
is the ultimate decision then made by the board as to who joins the board as representing the representatives, the residents?
The resident council representative comes to the board through the resident council. Residents on the board come through the nominee process just as any other board member does. They're not separated out differently. They're vetted by the board, they're accepted by the board, but they are not representing residents. They're a member of the board representing whatever expertise they bring to the board. So they're two different things. They're residents on the board and they're resident council members that attend the board meetings.
All right, thank you.
And please know, everyone, that we are recording this meeting. So it may be that if you want to hear a copy of it, you can send a request through to Claudia.
The recording will be on our website, vacra.org. When you sign in, it'll be for members. And anyone who wishes to have a printed copy of it can email me, blake.claudia@gmail.com, and I will send it to you.
Other questions?
Just one more thought. I think that since we have a person with a great deal of experience talking with us, what have you seen as the greatest reluctance on the part of some board members who do not approve of resident membership?
That's an interesting question because at Goodwin House, that hasn't been an issue for a very, very long time. And when I started out my presentation, I talked about how things evolve and it evolved at Goodwin House by opening the board to non-Episcopalians. It started very, very small and then grew. But I've always remembered resident council chairs being part of the board meetings. And if your board doesn't want a resident member of the board, would they be willing to have resident council chairs attend the board meetings? Because that's just as important. And that also allows the resident to represent the resident body. And what I'm hearing is that's very important for the board to hear what the residents think, what the residents want. And that's the way to do it. I absolutely believe that residents should be on the board, but they need to be on the board as a board member. But I do think the board needs to hear from the resident body, and that's through the resident council. So they're two different things. So if you can't get a resident on the board, see if you can get the resident council to attend the board meetings. But we've had residents on the board for, I guess, about 7 years, but resident council chairs have attended for years, and we haven't had board members that don't want the residents there. They've always been welcomed. We've always wanted to hear from the residents' point of view.
Thank you.
Another question in chat is the board self-perpetuating?
Yes.
I'm not sure what that means, but.
Well, the board actually used to be. The board, back in the old days, the board members would go off the corporate board onto the foundation board. And then when that term went off, they went back to the other board. No, there are term limits, and the board members are rotated so that we always have new people coming onto the board and others going off the board. If that's what the question was referring to.
And George
Does
Erickson?
that question relate to the board just electing the new members so that there's no stakeholder input in the process? It's purely a board process.
It's a board process.
Yeah. Could I ask a question about, does your board have executive sessions
It does.
at which resident members are not attending, or do they must attend if they're full-fledged directors?
The resident members attend, the staff that attend the board meetings, and the resident council chairs
Do not.
exit the meeting. But the board members, all board members attend the executive session.
Thank you.
And that's resident or not resident, yeah.
Interesting. Wow. More questions?
Anything else? How
Anyone
long have you been at Goodwin House? I've been at Goodwin House 34 years, since Goodwin House Bailey's Crossroads opened. Any other questions?
Naomi? No? Okay. Anyone else? No, I don't see anybody else. All right. Linda, thank you so much.
Oh,
We really made you work this morning. We really appreciate. And you can tell by the number of questions how important this issue is to all our communities. So we'll look forward to your remarks, and we'll be able to print some or all of them in the winter newsletter that's coming up for VACRA.
okay. Thank you all for having me.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thanks,
much.
Linda.
Thank you.
Thanks.